Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're looking at the normal cards that were introduced within Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links main box Darkness Gimmick. Dark Flattop is a dark attribute machine type synchro monster. It's a level 8 with 0 attack and 3000 defense. And it requires one dark tuner monster plus one or more non-tuner machine type monsters. Once per turn, you can target one reactor monster or one flying fortress Skyfire in your graveyard. Special summon that target, ignoring its summoning conditions. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one level 5 or lower machine type monster from your hand. This card was actually used by Krieger within Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. He was the character who used the reactor monsters, so you had Spell Reactor, Monster Reactor, and Trap Reactor, and each of them had an effect where they would inflict like 800 points of damage if your opponent activated any of those effects. So if one activated Trap, one activated Spell, or a monster effect, it would do 800 points of damage. So that happened each turn, so your opponent would have to be very concerned about how they're running their deck. And of course, Flying Fortress Skyfire was like the boss monster within that. It was almost like the combination of the three. It could destroy monsters, it could destroy cards on the field, and it could also do some burn damage. When he became a Dark Signer because of the whole history about his past and his village being attacked, and things happening and experiments happening which destroyed his people, one of the monsters he got was this Dark Flattop, which was specifically meant to continually revive his Flying Fortress Skyfire. It's a decent enough effect in that it can conditionally do this without requiring any conditions to it. But the other thing is, if it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you're able to then summon a level 5 or lower machine type monster. It's fine as an effect, but it's a very defensive card and it doesn't have any offense to it. It's reliant on using its effect. If you're able to negate this effect or be able to switch the attack and defense whilst it's in defense mode through things like shield and sword, you're able to then attack over this card. Ignition Beast Volcanon is an Earth attribute level 6 machine type fusion monster with 2300 attack and 1600 defense. It requires a machine type monster and one pyro type monster to summon it. When this card is fusion summoned, you can target one monster your opponent controls, destroy that target, also destroy this card. Then if both monsters were destroyed, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of that monster in the graveyard that was targeted by this effect. This is quite useful in that it can wipe out one of your opponent's cards, and depending on the monster, if it's got a certain amount of attack, that can inflict a lot of damage. Remember, with burn effects, it's half, so it's not as useful as it used to be, and you are having to get rid of this card to trigger off that effect. So you're having to invest heavily with a machine and a pyro monster and some sort of fusion card, be it Fusion Gate, Polymerization, or anything of the like, which is very conditional. Blue Blooded Oni is a dark attribute zombie type level 4 with 1000 attack and 1700 defense. When this card is normal or flip summoned, it is changed to defense position. Once per turn, you can detach one Xyz material you control to target one level 4 zombie type monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. This can be useful if you want to additionally Xyz summon within the turn, as you can then go into another level 4 Xyz monster, which is a rank 4 monster. You can go into Utopia or something along those lines. The concern is you are having to rip apart your Xyz materials from an Xyz monster that you control. It would have been nice if it had been something your opponent controls as well. It didn't have to be activated on your effect. My other concern is simply that you've put an investment into some other cards and you might actually speed through your Xyz monsters too quickly. Red-Headed Oni is a dark attribute zombie type level 4 with 1700 attack and 1000 defense. And its effect is, when this card is special summoned from the graveyard by the effect of the zombie type monster, you can target one face-up zombie type monster you control, detach one material from a monster on the field, and if you do, increase the targeted monster's level by 1 and its attack by 300. Even if targeting conditions are no longer correct. In this example, you are able to detach an Xyz material from either player, so it can be yours or your opponent's, and you're able to adjust the level of a monster by 1 and increase its attack points by 300. It's an okay effect, but again, it's conditional on you being able to special summon this from the graveyard by the effect of a zombie type monster. That is 3 conditions on this very specific card, which I don't see people are going to play. Yellow Bellied Oni is a level 4 dark attribute zombie type monster with 1000 attack and 1000 defense. The effect, when you exceed summon a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from a monster you control, then target 1 face-up Xyz monster on the field, reduce its rank by 1, and if you do, it loses 300 attack. This, of all 3, I think is the most useless. It requires you to detach an Xyz material from one of your monsters, not one of your opponents, which would have been a better effect, to downgrade your opponent's Xyz monster by 1 rank and make it lose 300 attack points. There are better ways of reducing your opponent's attack stats, or better yet, increasing your own, than to rely on this effect. Summon Reactor SK is a dark attribute machine type level 5 with 2000 attack and 1400 defense. And its effect is, the first time a monster is summoned to your opponent's side of the field, each turn, inflict 800 damage to your opponent. During the battle phase, the turn this effect is activated, you can negate the attack of 1 monster your opponent controls. You can send 1 face-up trap reactor Wi-Fi, 1 spell reactor Re, and this face-up card you control to the graveyard to special summon 1 flying fortress Skyfire from your hand, deck, or graveyard. This of the 3 reactor monsters is actually the most powerful because it actually has effects beyond its initial burn damage effect. That is a decent enough effect in itself, in that every time your opponent summons a monster, and it can be any form of summon, flip summon, normal summon, special summon, it does 800 points of damage. Secondly, you can actually shut down an attack of one of your opponent's monsters during that turn, which is also good to protect your other resources, as the other 2 monsters aren't very good at protecting themselves. And also you're able to just send this alongside the other 2 reactor monsters to then summon your flying fortress Skyfire from the hand, deck, or graveyard, which means you've got instant access. You don't have to run specific support to even search for the card. Flying fortress Skyfire is a level 8 machine type wind attribute with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. And its effect is, this card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card cannot be special summoned except with the effect of summon reactor SK. Once per turn, you can send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard to destroy 1 card your opponent controls. Once during each of your opponent's turns, you can activate 1 of the following effects. When your opponent normal summons or special summons a monster, destroy it and inflict 800 damage to your opponent. Or when your opponent sets a card, destroy it and inflict 800 damage to your opponent. The nice thing about this card is it can actually destroy up to 2 cards during the turn, because this can destroy by sending 1 of your cards during your turn, and actually when your opponent does anything, be it normal summon a card, or special summon a monster, or set a card, you're instantly able to destroy that card and inflict 800 points of damage. It's like fusing the 3 of the reactor monsters together to gain the effect, but unlike those cards which actually only inflict the damage, this also has the destruction part of that effect as well. This was the key boss monster used by Krieger within most of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's the first season, except when he became his Dark Signer self, in which case I think he had the Chakajalua, which was the Earthbound Immortal that was controlling him. Trap Reactor Wi-Fi is a dark attribute machine type level 4 with 800 attack and 1800 defense. And the effect, once per turn, when your opponent activates a trap card, you can destroy the trap card and inflict 800 damage to your opponent. This is a very decent effect, considering that it's not simply just inflicting the damage, it does actually destroy it, which means if your opponent is running a trap heavy deck, they're going to have to use and bait certain traps before actually using their really powerful ones. Otherwise they risk, wasting their resources. And since this effect can be activated during each of the turns, this can be used to devastate your opponent. Spell Reactor Re is a dark attribute machine type level 3 with 1200 attack and 900 defense. And its effect is, once per turn, when your opponent activates a spell card, you can destroy the spell card and inflict 800 damage to your opponent. Of the 3 monsters, I would say this is probably the weakest, in that it doesn't really have much of either one of its stats. Neither its attack nor its defense are particularly high, whereas with Summon Reactor its attack was 2000, and with Trap Reactor its defense was 1800. This is very much almost an even split between 1200 and 900, so you are going to need ways of protecting this card. Of the three monsters, this is probably the middle one. I'd argue that Summon Reactor is probably the best to gain its effects. This is the second ground in that most players are running lots of spell cards and only certain numbers of monsters and players. Only certain players will be running specific lots of trap cards, especially if they're running the character Odeon. Super Defense Robot Leo is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 4 with 1200 attack and 1600 defense. And its effect is, when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one Super Defense Robot monster or Orbital 7 from your hand. Once per turn, when exactly one Super Defense Robot monster or Orbital 7 and no other cards are added from your graveyard to your hand, except during the damage step, you can special summon it from your hand. I don't see the point of this archetype. It's a very bizarre one, and I know it's meant for the googly eyes Drum Dragon, but it's a very weak one, and okay, it searches for your Orbital 7. That's fine, but really, other than giving you a little bit of board presence, it doesn't do anything. Super Defense Robot Elephant is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 8 with 1400 attack and 2500 defense. And its effect is, when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one Super Defense Robot monster or Orbital 7 from your hand. Once per turn, you can target one Super Defense Robot monster or Orbital 7 you control. It becomes a level 8 until the end of this turn. This card cannot be used as an Xyz material for an Xyz summon, except for the Xyz summon of a machine type monster. This is the way of adjusting the levels of your Super Defense Robot monsters to go into your googly eyes Drum Dragon. It's okay as an effect, but outside of that, it doesn't really do anything. It has 2500 defense. I would have preferred that to have been on its attack, at least making it a little bit offensive, but as it is, it's just a sitting duck. Super Defense Robot Monkey is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 3 with 800 attack and 1200 defense. And its effect is, when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one Super Defense Robot monster or Orbital 7 from your hand. Once per turn, you can banish one machine type monster from your graveyard. Then you can add one Super Defense Robot monster or Orbital 7 from your graveyard and add that target to your hand. Again, this is fine. You can go into your elephant quite easily because this just lets you to special summon it, and then you can adjust the levels to go into googly eyes Drum Dragon. But it's a very small archetype of about 4 or 5 different monsters, and out of everything that's currently in the set, it's probably the one you don't want to be picking up. Soul Drain Dragon is a light attribute dragon type level 8 with 4000 attack and 0 defense. And its effect is, it cannot be normal summoned or set, it must be special summoned by a dragon type Xyz monster's effect in your possession and cannot be special summoned by other ways. When special summoned, if your life points are lower than your opponent's, this card gains attack equal to your current life points deficit, and if it does, your opponent takes no further damage this turn. This card cannot attack your opponent directly. I remember the episode this was actually seen within Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal. It was used alongside number 46 Draglon, which is the dragon type Xyz monster that would be able to special summon this card. I'm sure there's 1 or 2 other ones out there, but that's the specific example of the Mytherian number that was necessary to bring it out. It already starts off with 4000 attack points, which makes it a giant beat stick. But if your opponent actually has life points higher than yours, you get the difference in to be able to gain in its attack points. You could be over 5000 attack monster, which your opponent might not be able to deal with that easily. It does make itself just a giant beat stick, so they can actually destroy it with spell or trap cards or with monster effects. So you are going to need ways of shutting those down, or at least protecting your card with things such as Power of the Guardian. It does limit the amount of damage you can do in that it cannot attack directly, and your opponent takes no further damage in the turn it's used this effect. So there is the limitation from that point of view. But if you're able to implement some piercing damage effect with anything you've got equipped to this, then that's fine. You're able to just one-shot your opponent's monsters and maybe to OTK within a turn. Mecha Dog Moron is a light attribute machine type level 4 with 1000 attack and 1000 defense. And its effect is, when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, inflict 1000 damage to both players. When this card on the field is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, except by battle, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. This incentivizes your opponent not to destroy this card by card effect, because then they'd be the only ones taking the damage, rather to kind of take you and your opponent out at the same time. The concern is it does only half of this to 500 because of the whole rulings change with Duel Links. And the other thing is, it's such a weak defensive card that it's not even worth running unless your opponent is on such little life points. This would actually be enough to take them out, and then maybe crash into your opponent's attack position monster with this card. Chrysalis Mole is an Earth attribute rock type level 2 with 700 attack and 100 defense. And its effect is, when you contribute this card while Neospaces face up on the field to special summon one Neospatian Grand Mole from your hand or deck. I haven't actually seen anyone running these Chrysalis cards because I know they're the baby forms of the Neospatians, but it's much easier to just run a pure Neospatian deck than to have this baby form where, unless you're running a very specific type of deck, it's better just to run the original versions. Flintlock is a light attribute machine type level 4 with 1500 attack and 800 defense. And its effect is, once per turn, you can equip a Flint on the field to this card. You can take any Flint equipped to this card and equip it to another face-up monster. This card can only be equipped with one Flint at a time. While equipped with Flint, this card is unaffected by Flint's effect and it cannot be destroyed by battle. This is one of two cards within a 3-card combo. I think it was either a 3 or 4 card combo where it was called the Flintlock loop. Basically, the idea was you had 2 of these Flintlocks on your field. You would equip one Flintlock and you would use the spell card Morale Boost, and each time it would exchange your Flint to another monster, so your other Flintlock, and then you gain 1000 life points each time you did this. It was a continuous loop, and that meant that since it was no longer going to the graveyard, you wouldn't have the downsides of Morale Boost, so you could get your life points to a point where you would never lose. Other than for this very niche example of something of nostalgia, it's not useful as a hybrid strategy. I mean, I'm quite an old Yu-Gi-Oh player, so I'm familiar with it, but for a lot of newer players, they might not have even heard of this combination before. Mecha Bunny is an Earth attribute machine type level 2 with 800 attack and 100 defense. Its effect is, when this card is flipped face up, select one card on the field and inflict 500 damage to its controller. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one Mecha Bunny from your deck in face down defense position. So the idea of this is you're gradually being able to do some burn damage, 250 points, and then you're just able to summon multiple of these. It's good for deck thinning, and it's effective for that type thing. But outside of that, it's quite a useless effect. You have to run 3 of these, and if you've got multiple of these already in your hand, then you can't actually summon them outside of just normal setting them, which makes them just impossible to really benefit from. Zombie Mammoth is an Earth attribute zombie type level 4 with 1900 attack and 0 defense. Its effect is, destroy this card if you do not have a zombie type monster in your graveyard. When this face up card is destroyed, inflict damage to its controller equal to its original attack. Relatively speaking, this is just a giant beat stick for the zombie type. I mean, it has no effect outside of a downside effect. If you've got no zombies in the graveyard, then it just instantly destroys itself, and the second it destroys itself, you take a 1900 points of damage. It's useful for the time being as just a decent beat stick monster, and you can use it for an Exceed summon of a rank 4 monster, but I wouldn't go for the risk. There are much better monsters that might be slightly weaker in terms of their attack points, but they definitely have better abilities. Acid Crawler is an Earth attribute insect type level 3 with 900 attack and 700 defense. It has no effect because it's a normal monster and it's just a pack filler. Shape Snatch is an dark attribute machine type level 5 with 1200 attack and 1700 defense. It's a normal monster, and if anything it's worse than Acid Crawler. It's a level 5, it requires a tribute, and its stat lineup is so weak. Again, it's a pack filler. Amphibian Beast is a level 6 water attribute fish type monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense. I'd argue that this card is at least decent because even though it does require a tribute summon, it has 2400, whereas something like a Red Eyes Black Dragon, which has exactly the same attack and defense stats, is a level 7 and requires 2 tributes to summon it. Ever Living Underworld Cannon is a continuous spell card with the effect, Once per turn, when a zombie type monster is special summoned to your side of the field, inflict 800 damage to your opponent. This is very easy to do. You've got the continuous spell card called Call of the Mummy. That lets you summon a zombie type monster so long as you don't have any other monsters on the field. And a number of them, such as Mizuki, are able to revive themselves from the graveyard. You've got Book of Life, which is a spell card which helps to revive some of your monsters as well by banishing one of your opponent's cards. And there are definitely no excuses. You will be able to multiply these effects as you go within the duel. It will only do half the amount of damage, but 400 is decent enough to make it worth your while. Tanhauser Gate is a normal spell card with the effect target 2 monsters you control of the same type with 1000 or less attack. Both monsters' levels become the combined levels of those 2 monsters. This was the card that I was mentioning before, which works with Quentin's deck to make his number 9 Dyson Sphere. As you can see on the images, you've got Solar Windjammer and you've got Planet Pathfinder, the 2 cards that he used for the summoning, but it's very restrictive in how you can use it and the types of decks you can use it. Both of the monsters have to be 1000 or less attack points. It has to be 2 monsters you have that are currently on the field to use this effect. And also you've got to consider they have to be the same type, so you have to run a very specific type of deck. And also the monsters need to have consistent levels to them to make them into a rank monster that you want. It's not worth running monsters in the extra deck that you might not actually need or are just too heavy an investment to use this type of effect on. You also need to be careful considering the type of deck you're running, because Exceeds monsters that require 3 of a certain monster such as Terabyte or Shark Drake aren't going to work very well with this card. Monsters that require 2 Exceeds materials are going to work exactly fine, especially if they're high ranking Exceeds monsters. Flint is an equipped spell card with the effect a monster equipped with this card loses 300 attack and cannot change its battle position or attack. If the equipped monster is destroyed, select 1 monster on the field and equip this card to that target. This is a decent effect and it works very similar to like Shadow Spell, but because it has the ability to recycle and then equip onto other monsters, it can be a little bit better. It does have a less of a reduction in the attack stat of only 300, whereas Shadow Spell works on a reduction of 700, but at least because it's consistent, it's a fine card to have. Do I think it's going to actually be used? Probably not. There are so many other cards out there, equipped cards that are actually used much more of, and there are some that are just outright forgotten about, and definitely I think one of these is going to be forgotten. Dice is a quick play spell card with the effect roll a 6-sided die, and if you roll a 1 or a 6, add 1 card from your deck to your hand that requires a die roll. If you roll a number other than 1 or 6, roll it again and apply the appropriate effect. 1 or 6, return this card to the hand. 2, 3, 4 or 5, place this card on top of the deck. You can only activate 1 dice per turn. This is a good way of searching out some of your dice monsters and some of the dice spell and trap cards you've got, but other than that, it's very niche within a very specific type deck. It's not something I would consider running personally. Trap of the Imperial Tomb is a normal trap card with the effect when a zombie monster is special summoned from your opponent's graveyard to your field, target 2 cards on the field and destroy them. There are many ways that you can actually use this within the vampire archetype and even within zombies themselves, so it wouldn't be a difficult position to get yourself into. I liken this a little bit to Icarus Attack, but it's actually better in certain regards. Firstly, it doesn't require a tribute of any of your monsters and actually just destroys any of your opponent's monsters, and it's definitely worthwhile running because you will be meeting this condition fairly easily. Fake Explosion is a normal trap card with the effect activate only when an opponent's monster declares an attack. Monsters cannot be destroyed by this battle. After damage calculation, special summon 1 Summon Reactor SK from your hand or graveyard. I like the design of this card in that it helps to protect your reactor monsters. It does protect them from being destroyed by that battle, and then you're instantly able to summon your level 5 monster, which would normally require a tribute to bring it out. Although it does have to be from the hand or graveyard, so you are going to need to kind of search for it beforehand or to set it up. Zect Conversion is a normal trap card with the effect when a face-up insector monster you control is targeted for an attack, target the attacking monster, equip the attack target to that attacking monster, take control of the equipped monster while it is equipped with an insector monster by this effect. This is an easy snatch steal type of effect, which is always useful and it's always good for any type of deck, whether it's an archetype or not. And actually to have a dedicated version means it's definitely incentivizing people to run insectors a lot more frequently. As of yet, I've not really seen people been playing this, but I think it's something that as people discover, they will start using. Vampire Lady is a dark attribute zombie type level 4 with 1550 attack and the same in defense. The effect is when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, declare one card type, monster, spell or trap card. Your opponent sends one card of that type from their deck to the graveyard. I've seen this card before, and actually I've got a few copies of this. This I would say is the original vampire monster, because pretty much this was the first one to appear. It does have this effect where it sends one of those cards from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, so you can get rid of any specific threats that they have. It is your opponent's choice, but the fewer cards they have of that, the more limited they are as to, choosing the worst example from that. It does have to be inflicting battle damage, but I'm sure that's okay. You can always amp this card's attack points up. Vampire Dragon is a dark attribute zombie type level 5 with 2400 attack and 0 defense. Its effect is when this tribute summon card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one level 4 or lower monster from your deck to your hand. It's decent because it being a level 5 and 2400 attack is quite good. Most monsters of that level do require 2 tributes, and actually this does let you search for any level 4 monster you have. It doesn't have to be restricted to an attack range, a defense range, a type or an attribute. It's basically anything that's a level 4 or lower. Vampire Grimson is a dark attribute zombie type level 5 with 2000 attack and 1400 defense. And its effect is, if a monster you control would be destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can pay 1000 life points for each monster that would be destroyed. Instead, you must protect all your monsters that would be destroyed if you use this effect. At the end of the battle phase, if this card destroyed any monsters by battle, you can special summon them from the graveyards to your field. So the first thing is, it's a level 5 like most of the vampire monsters are. It does provide your monsters with battle protection or destruction effect protection by paying 1000 life points, but that's per monster, not as an overall. That's just per monster. So you could have to be, forking out up to 3000 life points in protection, which is just overly too much. But the benefit is you are able to revive any monsters that this card destroys in battle, so you can be able to use those effects or to be able to use their monsters for your own attacks without relying on any resources. Interplanetary Purpley Thorny Beast is a level 5 dark attribute beast type with 1100 attack and 2200 defense. And its effect is, when a monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, while this card is in the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your graveyard, but when it's summoned this way, banish this card when it leaves the field. You can only use the effect of Interplanetary Purpley Thorny Beast once per turn. Okay, this is able to revive itself. There is another example of that, which is, I think, a newer card, which was in Yugioh 5Ds. It was used by one of these kind of hypnotherapists who was in the original kind of like Duel Links Cup, and he was facing Luna at the time. This is able to just revive itself from the graveyard. Since it's a level 5, it does let you go into some of your rank 5 monsters, such as, I think, number 61, Volcasaurus is a good example of a monster you might want to come out from this effect. But other than that, it's an okay effect. It really doesn't do anything other than summon itself as a level 5 monster. Insector Earwig is a dark attribute insect type level 4 with 1000 attack and 1000 defense. And its effect is, once per turn, you can equip one insector monster from your hand or graveyard to this card. While this card is equipped to a monster, that monster gains attack and defense equal to this card's attack and defense. When this card is sent to the graveyard while equipped to a monster, the monster this card was equipped to gains 1000 attack until the end phase. Okay, this is a decent effect because that insector monster you get does gain 1000 attack and defense, which is not a bad boosting effect. There are some equipped cards that do more, most will do less than this, and it does, when it's sent to the graveyard, provide your monster with 1000 additional attack points just to protect itself until your next turn. But it's consistent for that reason. Is it relatively that good within the insectors? Probably not. Anti-aircraft flower is an earth attribute plant type level 3 with 0 attack and 1600 defense. Its effect is, by tributing one insect type monster on your side of the field, inflict 800 points of damage to your opponent's life points. Again, with the burn damage reduction, that would be 400 life points. and it does run well within an insect type deck, so you would actually be combining plants and insects, which is fine. I don't think of any other decks that actually work very well with this, but I think Prickly Fairy, there's a defensive monster that actually works alongside plants and insects, and it makes itself the target of attacks. I think that's another example of one of those. It's fine, but this is really only useful near the end of the game where your opponent might have very few life points, and this might be this example of cowboying someone for game. Insector Ant is a dark attribute insect type level 3 with 200 attack and 600 defense. And its effect is, once per turn, you can equip one insector monster from your hand or graveyard to this card. While this card is equipped to a monster, that monster's level is increased by 3. Also, it gains attack and defense equal to this card's attack and defense. If this equipped monster would be destroyed, you can destroy this equipped card instead. In terms of the attack and defense gain, 200 and 600 is not enough to make this viable. It's actually only good for its level manipulation effect. It helps to make your monsters either a level 5 or a level 6 to go into their rank 5 or 6 Xyz monsters. Dark Sea Float is a dark attribute machine type level 1 with 0 attack and 300 defense. Its effect is, when this card on the field is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, the owner of this card draws 1 card. It's not really that useful an effect. Most players are not going to try and destroy this by an effect, and the reality is, unless you destroy it by your own effect, and it's an effect that you can use multiple times within various turns at no cost, it has more of a downside of you just running it in multiples and possibly drawing into it when you absolutely need it least, than for when it could become potentially useful. Vampire's Domain is a continuous spell card with the effect. Once per turn, you can pay 500 life points. During your main phase this turn, you can normal summon 1 vampire monster in addition to your normal summon or set. Even if this card leaves the field, you can only gain this effect once per turn. Each time your vampire monster inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain the same amount of life points. The good thing about this card is, firstly, this lets you normal summon an additional vampire monster each turn just by paying 500 life points. It's very similar to having a more restricted version of Ultimate Offering, which was banned because you could basically pay 500 life points and continue to summon monsters so long as you had the life points to pay for it and the monsters in your hands, which was ridiculous at the time. This has that limit on it. Even when it's leaving the field and you activating it again, it doesn't let you activate it more than the once in that turn. The benefit is, if your vampire monster inflicts battle damage, then potentially you're gaining life points more than what you've actually paid out with this effect. So you're constantly in that state where you can recycle and refuel your life points to continue to get yourself into that decent game state. Insector Crossbow Zectaro is an equipped spell card with the effect. Equip only to an insector monster, it gains 500 attack. Your opponent can activate cards or effects in response to the activation of the equipped monster's effects. So not only does this give your insector a 500 attack point boost, but it prevents your opponent from activating effects that would stop your monster's effects from working. It's pretty decent for what they can do, and actually it helps to stop your opponent from interrupting your plays. Final Insection is a normal spell card with the effect: send 5 face-up insector cards you control to the graveyard, destroy all cards your opponent controls. Also, during the battle phase of this turn, your opponent cannot activate monster effects that activate in the hand or graveyard. I don't understand how you're going to get 5 face-up insector cards to the graveyard to begin with. You have 6 monster and spell and trap zones in total. That means you're going to have to make sure you've got everything face up to be able to activate this effect, and this is going to have to require quite a few turns of setup. It's just very difficult to imagine it's actually going to be pulled off with that effect, and it's just too late of an effect. Your opponent's going to set up on you whilst you're trying to set up for this effect. Definitely not worth running. Miracle Dig is a normal spell card with the effect: if at least 5 of your monsters are banished, target 3 of them, return them to the graveyard. This is meant to counter things like Soul Release, which force your cards to be banished, or if you've had to banish them yourselves. I remember I've got multiple of this card, and even at that time I thought this is a very weak effect. Recovering from the banish pile to the graveyard is very ancient as an effect. Most cards these days that do recover from banish let you either special summon them or recover them to the hand. Of course, this does have some benefits in that actually if you need those cards in the graveyard, you can then set them there, and then they're quite useful for some of the chaos builds, where you can then banish those cards to be able to special summon into your various monsters such as Chaos Sorcerer. And the final card is Insector Gauntlet. This is a normal trap card with the effect target one face-up insector monster you control. Equip this card to that target, it gains 1000 defense, and it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. This can be quite useful. I think there's one of them which is at level 6, which does grant your insector monster like 2400 as its base defense points. If you were to equip that with this card as well, that would become a 3400 defense monster. Very difficult to out, especially since your opponent cannot use any card effects that destroy specifically. It's good for a defensive strategy, but it's only so useful as long as this card remains face up on the field. Second, they target this with things like Mystical Space Typhoon, Cosmic Cyclone, Dicefoon, etc. The sooner you're going to actually lose to this stalling strategy. Out of all the cards that we've mentioned in the normal cards, I think my favourites are the Reactor series. There are a bunch of monsters that can inflict burn damage to your opponent for everything they do, and they do have destruction effects, which is also quite nice. The ones that I don't like and my least favourite within this set are those super defense robots. They're so weak, and it's such a minimal archetype with only one Xyz monster as its boss monster that it's just not credible to run them or even draw into these cards. They're just to fill in the pack. What do you guys think? Do you agree with me? What are your favourites within the set, and which are the least favourite / the ones you absolutely hate? Leave those in the comments down below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.